Marketer of the Day, episode 531, Energy, Productivity, Ideas, Self-Awareness, and Finding Your Strengths, with Darren Virassammy.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the Marketer of the Day podcast. We're talking with Darren Virassammy, and Darren is an expert on getting the members of your team with the right skills in the right positions. So we're going to hear all about that and what he has going on. So Darren, glad to be talking to you.
Likewise, Robert. Thank you so much for having me on board.
Well, heck yeah. So what is the focus of you and your business these days? What's on your mind?
So 34 Strong, what we actually do is we really give a voice to the disengaged employee. If you think about it, 70% of our workforce in the United States is disengaged in some capacity, showing up to work, just basically collecting a paycheck, counting the clock, Robert, looking for what time's 5 o'clock coming. And a big part of that stems from the fact that people aren't valued for being valuable. We just put people in these lines and try and run them through the mill, through these cogs, and don't actually realize the way that people are uniquely wired. So what 34 Strong does is we actually use the Gallup StrengthFinder, the Clifton StrengthFinder assessment, to really identify the unique talents that people have and find the best ways to really get teams aligned to really maximize contributions of people and really get to the outcomes that we're seeking that can really boost your profitability, productivity, and gain a lot more alignment along those ends. So really the overarching goal of what 34 Strong does is actually driving employee engagement. That's what we're really, really focusing on, and getting people to show up as better versions of themselves.
Super cool. So everybody wins and people aren't just daydreaming about the time in the future when maybe they'll feel happy and fulfilled. And so the Strengths Finder, like what sort of strengths does it find exactly?
So basically, the nutshell overview is several decades ago, there's a gentleman named Dr. Donald Clifton. He asked the question of what will happen when we focus on what's right with people instead of what's wrong with them. So this is a fundamental shift even for today. If you think about it, a lot of our development strategies around our human development ends are really focused on what are our weakest areas and trying to develop those weaknesses and trying to improve those. So when Clifton asked this question of what will happen when we focus on what's right with people instead of what's wrong, it launched him into a near decade-long study, and he studied over 1 million people trying to identify how talent naturally exists within them. And what emerged through his studies, Robert, was there's these 34 patterns of talent that exist within all people in a ranked order from 1 through 34. And we all have it. We all have it. And talent's not defined as to how well you can shoot a basketball or how good at coloring you are or anything like that. Talent's defined as our natural way of thinking, feeling, or behaving that can be productively applied. So different examples of talent that we might not even think of is taking psychological ownership of what you say you're going to do, being able to be highly driven to get a lot of things done, really getting a lot of energy from being productive or crossing things off of a checklist, being able to be really reflective and thinking inwardly, going through the ideation process of being able to spout off a bunch of ideas, but not necessarily being the one that's the greatest at executing them is a talent. And then maybe there's others that are better aligned with actually executing or building relationships. And the StrengthsFinder helps us to identify these talents and the ways that they can be productively applied on teams.
Interesting. So some people are better at the idea, some people are better at the production, some people are better at the people skills. And so if someone takes this test, then like what do they do then? Where do they take this test to and what happens?
That's a great question. So in the Gallup world, they're actually getting close to they're past 18 million, almost 19 million people have taken the Clifton StrengthsFinder, and many people just take the assessment, they go through the process of, wow, that totally resonates with me, and then they don't do anything with it. What 34 Strong does, what we actually end up coming and doing, and there's other organizations out there as well that do a lot of this work, is they actually get into a place of digging into how can we really use that productively? How can we actually aim that in towards productive application, whether it's on a personal level? It's taking that self-awareness, Robert, and then asking ourselves how, with that awareness, how can I use that productively? What's really fascinating too is when you have your results, when you have your top 5 results, what ends up happening is your strengths, these talents, they can be your absolute best of you. So they can be your greatest assets and your greatest liabilities. We can overuse them, underuse them. So just talking with somebody, kind of digging into it a little more, can get you much further. On an organizational level, that's the area that 34 Strong really differentiates from a lot of our peers, is the fact that we really do this on an organizational level to get teams aligned. But there's a lot of great tools when you take the assessment, a lot of great questions, videos, different things like that are out there. And just looking at YouTube videos that are out there. Gallup has a whole channel on strengths. It's out there, so you can learn a lot more about it.
And that's something that I probably hear this lesson maybe once every 1 or 2 months, that it's important just to know what operating system we're running, to kind of take some excuse me, to take some sort of psychological test of some kind, just to kind of know where your strengths and weaknesses are, know how you think, know where you're best suited.
Yeah, well, what's really interesting, so the StrengthFinder, that's a great point, Robert, and the StrengthFinder gets lumped in with many other psychological profiles. And what's really different from it, there's a lot of great assessments out there, a lot of great personality profiles. DISC, Myers-Briggs, those two are very familiar to a lot of folks. They're outstanding. The StrengthFinder is not really a personality assessment. That's the fundamental difference. It's not actually measuring your personality. It's measuring your talent, your natural way of thinking, feeling, or behaving. So that operating system example that you really gave an example of there, that's a great way of putting it. And it shows us how we're uniquely going to show up, the things that naturally top of mind, each of us will want to contribute in the work environment. I might naturally show up, Robert, and be ready to contribute in the, hey, what's on the list? What are the things that we have to get done? How do I get those things knocked out? You really might be contributing by saying, hey, who are all the people that need to be involved in this process? How do I connect them together? How do I bring them together and make sure that they're staying together while we're getting all of these things done? Other people might really contribute to the lens of, geez, who are all the other people that we need to bring in, that we really need to sell this idea to so it can really take traction? And then there's others that are going to be thinking and asking questions. Well, are we thinking about the right ideas? Why are we thinking about this idea? Are we having the right dialogue? And all of those, that delicate push and pull and that tension that might be there, it actually gets us to a place on teams, Robert, where we can actually see the value of that tension. The example I love to give, the Golden Gate Bridge, I take it you're very familiar with it. It doesn't stand because those cables are slack and loose. It actually stands because there's a healthy amount of tension between those. Instead of seeing that on our workplace teams as, hey, this is a bad thing, we're able to actually see it through the lens of the impact that it can have, and in understanding that operating system of how we're going to show up and how our colleagues are going to show up from a contributions lens and a needs lens. What are people going to need to be able to show up to be in their zone of genius? How do we play to that collectively and help bring out the best not only in ourselves, but in our peers?
So with this kind of assessment of talent, does this mean that if there's too much of one kind, that's bad, or that we need a healthy mix, or is that just too simple of a question?
It's a great question. It's a question we often get when we actually get into working organizationally with teams. We actually put together a whole team talent map. One of the things that we look at over time, and we do multi-year work, really transforming organizational culture. But one of the things on the team talent map that we'll look at is exactly that. And we'll start identifying, hey, what are some of the talents that are showing up regularly on this team? What are the goods of that? What are the ways that we know that this team is going to be really showing up and have a lot of muscle, a lot of energy, a lot of talent? But then we also ask the question, what are the watch-outs of that? As I mentioned, our talents can be our greatest assets and our greatest liabilities. Sometimes when you have really a strong showing of certain talents on a team, what happens, Robert? We can move into a groupthink. So it actually illuminates where are we strong, but also can help manage through the groupthink and really illuminate where the blind spots are. There might be Johnny that is the only one on a team of 20 that has a certain talent showing up. And he might have been looked at previously as the outlier. Why aren't you following along in line with the group? Now we're able to see that, hey, he's actually bringing a really unique talent set that we might not be considering as a group. And instead of looking at it through the lens of, hey, why doesn't Johnny come along? The question becomes, let's get Johnny's opinion in here. Let's get Johnny's perspective in here, because he might be seeing something that we're just fundamentally not even looking at. It's not even on our radar in the collective group. That brings that balance, and it can actually get us to better decisions, better outcomes. We lean into things that used to be frustration and start moving them to a place of fascination. That's how the dialogue changes. And I want to be clear, Robert, this doesn't happen just by taking the assessment, reading up a little bit on it, talking to somebody about it. This is kind of like going to the gym. You can't go to the gym on the 2nd of January, lift weights and run for 9 hours and then say, hey, I got that all done for the year. I'm not going back in. I don't need to exercise. I can eat like garbage. I don't need to do anything. It's a consistent approach that we're taking that can help develop that mindset and those muscles, not only individually, but on a team.
So to help us understand all this, do you have any cool, interesting stories about like some organization you work with where you just totally transform things with this system?
Yeah, I think there's a great case study, and it's out of the Midwest. It's really interesting the way that it kind of came together. There was this company, there was a triad group of companies, and there was Nancy and Russell Merrick. They were a manufacturing company. So what ended up happening, Robert, was they were struggling. The company was bleeding money. It was not profitable. It was in the red. And it was basically not looking like they were going to be surviving much longer. They had massive turnover. Their turnover was up at like 80%. It was near that range. What ended up happening was they had their daughters came home from college. They had taken the StrengthFinder in college. They brought it home and had their family take it. And it completely changed the relationships on the home front. Parents were understanding children better. Sisters, siblings were understanding each other better. And it was allowing them to get those relationships much, much stronger. And Nancy saw that, hey, things needed to change. They were basically in a Hail Mary situation within the company because it didn't have much life in it. They were losing money drastically, and they knew something needed to change. Nancy was part of the inaugural class at Gallup when they were going through the Gallup certification courses. And she went through that process, came back to the triad companies, and decided that they were going to start with a small team and work their way through it and introduce the assessment into that team and start working diligently on building the relationship. So each week they would talk about different themes. They would start identifying how those talents played from different people. And the long and the short of it, Robert, is over time, that particular team, it was a customer service team, became stronger. They started improving customer retention. And the team ended up, the assessment ended up going through the rest of the team. And as time would have it, they had an onboarding process for new employees that would actually take the assessment, would gain some coaching around it, would start understanding how it worked. And effectively, instead of just doing a team workshop, if you will, and just having a team building day, they really worked to bake it into their culture because they knew something had to change. So the long and the short of it is what happened is over this period of time, 18 months later, and they've sustained this, they've stayed alive, 18 months later, they'd completely turned the company around from basically bleeding a hole out and completely on the brink of dying as a company to being very profitable. They had turned their profitability around, by over 200%. Keep in mind they were in the negative, but they were profitable again. And they were able to actually reduce turnover from above 80% down to less than 8%. And in the manufacturing industry, they had also had a scrap rate of 35%, meaning that 35% of their materials were getting dumped. You can imagine how painful that is to manufacturing business. They turned that scrap rate down to 1% over the time period of introducing strengths into the company. So basically what we ended up having was a massive turnaround on the organization. The real crux of this, Robert, was they did that, and they actually kept the company the exact same size. They obviously had turnover to get to the staff that ended up staying on board, but they hadn't grown the company in terms of the size, in terms of the amount of employees that were on board. It was a complete turnaround in their culture, and it allowed them to create a culture that was sustainable so they could grow for the long term and really be set up to tap into their own potential. So that's just a little bit of an overview of what it can do in the long term without getting too technical into it. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome because like a lot of, I mean, if someone wasn't as strategic as using this tool, they might say, well, let's just like hire a bunch more people and make the problem worse, or like do any number of things to, you know, bring the business towards failure faster. But by
you got it.
Yeah, but with this, you kind of like, you know, rearrange the people, put the right people in the right place, like, which is what you're all about. And so how did you come across this sort of thing? Like, did you yourself struggle with like this sort of problem with people, or like how did you go from, you know, starting out to being where you're at here?
Yeah, great question. So with me, I had worked in the construction industry for many, many years. And I say this not lightly, but I had the privilege in my tenure in that industry and in other industries I'd worked in, Robert, of having just phenomenal leadership. And I also had the privilege of having absolutely terrible and atrocious leadership with no human development strategy. And I got to see both ends of the spectrum as to when you have excellent leadership, what an engaged workplace looks like, what an engaged team looks like. I also had the privilege of seeing when that wasn't together, what could happen and what could transpire. My last role that I had prior to going out on my own and starting 34 Strong with my business partner, Brandon Miller, who was in that original Gallup class that went through the original certification on strengths. I was working in an organization where I saw a team that was highly disengaged, and it was because of leadership. I had become really, really good at a job that I had become highly disengaged in. And I realized there was a different way. And I didn't want to be a part of that problem, and I wanted to take a swing at making an impact with others. While I was working at that particular company, in a capacity where I was disengaged, I was also teaching, and I was helping my students start their own businesses and create engagements in their own organizations. I was also helping other entrepreneurs find engagement in their organizations and get the best of themselves. And one day I had to look in the mirror and realize that someday you got to do it for yourself. And you got more to do in your life than just sit here and continue to live the way that you are. And that moment for me, Robert, came actually on a beach in Hawaii. My daughter laughed out loud for the first time in my lap. She was about 4.5 months old. First vacation my wife, my daughter, and I had taken together. And when she laughed out loud, something really struck a chord in me. I was at a place where she made me realize, wow, that's amazing. My daughter's tapping into human potential. She's laughing for the first time. She's going to go to kindergarten. She's going to walk. She's going to talk. There's all these things that she's going to do. And in that moment, I stared into her eyes, and they reflected back at me. What happened to your potential? What happened to your potential? Did you give up on that? Where did it go? And I came back from that trip, Robert, and I was given the amazing gift of you are what you focus on. My mind had changed and something had to shift. And I knew after that, when I came back from that trip, that I was going to do something different. And within 2 months of that trip, I met my business partner, Brandon Miller, and he shared with me what he was doing with strengths. I had taken the StrengthFinder, thought it was amazing, but I was like 90% of the people that have taken it, and I put it on a shelf and said, someday maybe. Well, that someday maybe came thanks to my daughter. And I was able to cut a deal with the company that I was at the time, stand board, help consult them in finding my replacement, trained up my replacement, and moved on, and here we are today.
Super cool. So how can people avoid that problem that you said there of, there was like millions of people have taken this test, but most people haven't done anything with it. What should people what should people be doing once they've taken this test?
Well, once they've taken the test, there's a couple of things. On an individual level, use the resources that come with the test. That's the whole thing. When people take the assessment, there is a whole treasure trove of reports and questions that people can go through and dig into. Oftentimes, people don't do that. It's right there. There's a whole portal. It's pretty phenomenal. There's videos that you can watch. There's a lot that you can dig into. So really lean into that. There's some great communities on Facebook as well. Just Googling in Gallup StrengthFinder or Clifton StrengthFinder. There's a lot of communities that are there that people can kind of join into and learn a lot more about strengths and have the dialogue, ask questions. There's people that are out there that'll gladly answer the questions, and there's resources that are out there. Gallup has through Strength Center on YouTube, they have a whole treasure trove of videos. And there's also a program called Call to Coach that's out there. It's outstanding via Gallup. And sometimes they pick specific talents, the specifics, these 34 themes, these 34 strengths that are out there. People can dig in much more with those and get into that. And then, of course, if it's on an organizational level, you're really looking at creating long-term organizational change and really baking strengths into your culture. I mean, that's the language of what 34 Strong does for the long term. We like to use the analogy. You've had the partner that you've dated over time, and you've brought different partners home. When you decide that you're ready to get married and settle down for good with your culture, that's what we do. We're going to bring it full spectrum and really help set it up for the long term. So it really depends on the needs. If it's organizational, that's the space of what we do. If it's just singular, really digging into it on an individual level. And I think for many of your listeners, I think some of the individual elements will be really, really powerful as well. Those are some of the resources that are out there.
Awesome. So on an individual level, we should all be taking this StrengthFinder and not only take it, but look on YouTube and look on the resources so that way we can apply it in the proper ways. And then as far as that organizational level, that 34strong.com, why should people go there and what's waiting for them there when they go?
Yeah. So what they can expect when they get there, well, why they should go there is if you're looking for a whole treasure trove of articles and information on employee engagement and even on strengths just across the board and how this approach really can drive traction in your organizations, that's what you'll find there. We've got a whole team, not only internally, but externally. We've partnered with a lot of great other organizations, some other great leadership, just real gurus that are out there that are able, that their articles are also shared on our site. So we've really become an aggregator of just thought that's out there, and you will find a lot of information there. So great resource for you. And again, that's on an individual side as well. What you can expect from us is just some of the ideas as to how to put this into play with your organization, or if you're looking at digging deeper, you have some information on some of the programs that might be beneficial for you to get into, and you can definitely become one of the subscribers for our articles that are coming out regularly also. So you can see some video traction on us as well.
Awesome. So lots of learning materials. And then as far as the programs you offer, can you give us a little bit of a taste, like what sort of things?
Yeah, a big part of what we're doing, Robert, mainly is our long-term programs. We have something called the Core 34 program. And in a nutshell, this is not a perfect science, but it typically is about a 3-year program spread across 4 different phases. And it's broken down. We're really digging into the leadership in organizations, getting the leadership aligned, because if the leadership is not bought into making this a reality and taking the ownership that they're the creators of culture, then creating cultures of employee engagement that are through a strengths-based approach is never really going to happen. That then flows into a managerial component where we really have a program called the Best Manager Academy, and that's part of our Core 34 program. That's where we're really helping managers understand their role in creating workplace environments. 70% of an employee's engagement is tied directly to their manager. It's oftentimes people don't quit companies they quit their manager, they quit their supervisor. And it's really getting managers to understand the importance of that. We then get into the associate levels of how is it on an individual level that they're going to be able to unlock their talents and go through a development process. And at that point, leadership and management are actually the place where they can really help hone and develop that. So that's just a very, very quick overview of what we do, and on a high level. And we also do, keynote talks, different things like that as well. But we've got a team that's spread out across the country that works with 34 Strong.
Super cool. Sounds like you guys really have things dialed in and you're doing lots of amazing stuff. So everyone listening right now needs to go to 34strong.com. That's 34strong.com. Whether you're an individual and you want to poke around and check out the different resources, the videos, the training there, there's always something new to be picked up. And if you're an organization or a manager, things like that, then check out some of those programs like the Core 34 program. So that way you can be living at your best. And so yeah, lots of great stuff here. You've given us tons to think about here today, Darren. And so is there any other place people should go to, or is 34strong.com the place to be?
34strong.com is a great place to be. They can head there. So.
Awesome. So if the subjects, the topics, the things we talked about today sound interesting to you, you want to jump in and check out more, 34strong.com is where you should go, and we'll see you there. And thanks, Darren, for stopping by and for dumping a lot of interesting things for us to think about, and so that way we can take this test and apply things and do the right actions and be in the right place. So that way we're not just spinning our wheels, we're not just frustrated, and the people around us aren't frustrated either. So that way everybody wins. So thanks for stopping by and for sharing some of this great stuff with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Robert. Really, really, truly a pleasure. Thanks for reaching out, and thank you so much.
Awesome. You got it. Please take a second to rate and subscribe to Marketer of the Day in the iTunes Store. It's free. marketeroftheday.com/iTunes.